KSP. So first we will launch this rocket here into low carbon orbit, and then I would dock with my space station. So this is my space station up here. This is just something I'm building for this sandbox world. It is a orbital refueling station, so you can see what it should look like here. I have a fuel tank, monopropellant tank, control unit, and my docking clamp. I have an identical one at the launch pad, with some RCS thrusters that would be very important for maneuvering. So when you're building your vehicle that you want to dock, you want to make sure it has these core features. You need to have something to control it with. You need to have a docking clamp. You need to have these RCS thrusters up here and up here. And then you also want to make sure it doesn't lose power. So you can either have some batteries, or just have these little solar panels over here, or you can put some RTGs, and you just want to make sure it doesn't lose power when you detach it from your main rocket. And also a good tip, obviously not applicable for KSP, but good form is to put some control modules on your booster stage so that you can pilot it back to Kerbol, but obviously not required. Final comment. So when you go into the docking procedure, it's really important that you don't have to worry about the rotation of your vehicle. So before you launch, you want to make sure that your station is oriented in some sort of direction for these things down here. So either one of these things. So right now I have this docking clamp, which I'm going to dock with, pointed normal. You can see on the nav ball here is pointed normal, and then I will launch another ship. So now when I go to dock my second fuel tank, I'll just be able to put it in normal on SAS, and all I have to worry about is lateral manipulation with RCS thrusters. So let's get to the launch. Final thing, you want to make sure you set this as target when you go to your launch. So yeah. Another tip, this is obviously skippable, but if you're trying to play realistically, this is something to do in real life, is you want to make sure that your space station is positioned a little past where you're launching from. That way it's not a concern. So you can see here, so first let's set this as target. This is unskippable step, you have to make sure to do this. So here's the desert launch, here's the KSC with my rocket. So now, if I want to get the rocket launch to the space station as quickly as possible, then I'm going to do some time skip. And I just want to wait for my space station to get slightly past my KSC here on the map. So now it's approaching the KSC, and okay. So this should give me some margin. Now the reason why you do this is because when you put your rocket into orbit, the periapsis should be slightly below. Also, when you're just first starting out, you want to make sure this is a perfectly circular orbit. So I have apiapsis 200,000, periapsis 199, pretty close. So you just want to make sure it's a perfectly circular orbit, because then that minimizes the amount of wiggle you have when you're actually launching. So let's get to that minimizes any unnecessary distance you have to travel. So let's get to launching. So go back to my space center. Okay, so let's go back and fly my rocket. So one thing to note, when you are setting up your vehicle that you're going to dock to whatever you have already in orbit, you want to make sure that the RCS thrusters are really well balanced. This is your first time. So with this, I don't have to worry about rotation because it's pretty well balanced. If I go forward, it'll go forward. If I go back, it'll go back. Sometimes when you do those kinds of manipulations, because the center of mass is off where you're actually doing the RCS thrusters from, it'll also induce rotation, and you have to wait for the SAS to correct for that. And it's just really a pain. So without further ado, let's launch. Now, if you've noticed, I also have some mods active. So I have Eve for the clouds, I have Scatterer to give me the cool water, Parallax for this, and then another mod, I don't remember the name, that gives me the stars, and then the engine plume is from a mod called RealPlume, which gives me these cool engine plumes. They're a lot more realistic than the ones you get in-game. So since the vector engine is supposed to be a replica of the space shuttle engine, you kind of get that same kind of design language, or same plume as with the space shuttle had. So I have my rocket set up where these are 2 booster fuel tanks, then this core stage is completely full of fuel. So this rocket is really overbuilt for what I'm doing, and could get away with a lot smaller rocket. But since it's a Kerbal space program and not real life, and rocket launchers don't cost billions of dollars, this way is much more fun. So yeah, I did a pretty shallow orbit here, just because this can be a little prone to krakens because it's so long. But yeah, soon I'll attach these boosters. Okay, attach those boosters, and now I just continue my burn. So the first step is you just want to get into orbit around Kerbin. Now you want your periapsis to be slightly below the periapsis of your target vessel, which is the space station right here. So yeah, so as you can see, I didn't do a great job in my launch. I'm a little tilted, but not to worry, we can go back and correct for that in a few moments. So got that apoapsis pretty close. Cut power, drop the maneuver node, circularize a bit. Now don't worry about the ascending and descending nodes for now. You just want to get into an orbit, and then you won't have to worry about that. So here we have the periapsis. So my periapsis is about 100,000 meters below target. Now you can increase or decrease this, but that means you'll just have to warp more speed, which might, it doesn't make a huge difference, but you might have to warp a bit longer. It's just the attachable nose cone. So activate RCS, going towards a maneuver node. Yeah. Alright, let me just time warp to the spot. Okay. So I have a nice long 30-second burn here. One tip, if you're doing something like what I am, where I'm using the same engine for ascension and for vacuum maneuvers, which obviously doesn't work in real life, but because the nozzles have to be different sizes. But if you're doing that, I highly advise changing the thrust limiter once we get towards the latter parts, and you'll see me do that. That just gives you finer control over maneuvers. When you're doing stuff that's less than 100 meters per second delta V, it can be a bit dicey trying to control your stuff using Z and X. But for this part, it's fine. So you can see here at the RealPlume mod, it gives you a lot more realistic kind of engine plume. You have this big kind of blossom instead of the straight line, or even like the tapering plume that you get with the stock version, which is a lot more true to what happens if you want your real life vacuum engine operating as opposed to a Kerbal space program rocket engine. So we do this burn. As you can see, I have tons of margin in this rocket. I recommend building a rocket with a lot of margin just for your first try. If you don't have a lot of margin, it might be a bit challenging trying to get things all sorted. Okay, so the next step is you want to make sure that both rockets are in the same plane, or both satellites, excuse me. So, right now I'm in a slightly skewed plane compared to my target, which is this yellow line. So I want to go to my ascending node, which is 3.9 degrees. Click, drop down and maneuver, and then I just want to tweak this until the ascending node and the descending node are super close together. So just use your, oh, overshot it. So this is a little tricky, but you want to get it where the ascending node and descending node, so this one and the other one, switch sides around your orbit. So you can see they're going to switch just a moment. And now they're starting to switch sides. And when they're at opposite sides, you can see this is pretty the same plane. Descending node 0.0. So now you can see the burn time is 7 seconds. Since we're starting to do alignment for the actual docking gear, I recommend reducing your engine authority down quite a lot. So now you see this jumps to 33 seconds. So it might be a bit boring, but it's really important if you want to make sure you get an exact maneuver. So let me just adjust this so it's lined up. And now we fast forward to the maneuver. So yeah, this is the first step. You want to make sure they're both on the same plane, and then the next step will be looking at the interception nodes. Oh crap. Okay. I misclicked that there. Get it down to 15 seconds, and then perform my burn. Oh, it's 16 and a half. 17. Okay, good. So now I'm just doing my burn, and the goal is just to get these two lines in the same plane. So when I look at it like this, they're both overlapping. Now you have to do this at the either the ascending or the descending node, because that's where they overlap. If you don't do it there, then you'll get some funky orbits where you won't be able to dock. So you want to make sure you do it like this. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, now the next step is, as you can see, because I timed my launch where they were aligned, I'm pretty close, so I just have to work a little bit, so I'm going to be a little careful here. Now you just want to get it where they're sort of close. They don't have to be super close, but you want them to be like, ooh, might have overshot it there, let's see. Yeah, so this is almost perfect. So what these are is your intercept nodes. So this is telling me where these two craft will intercept, my craft and the target, and their separation. So this node, intersect 1, separation 24.8 kilometers. Now this is not good. You don't want to have 24.8. So you want to tweak it with these until you get into a pretty low separation. So 1.2 kilometers is very manageable. So once they reach this point, they'll have 1.2 kilometers separation with 64.7 meters per second relative speed. So I waited too long, so let me do a second maneuver node. but you can just, if you're on PC, just use the scroll wheel, and you can manipulate these until they're close. Okay, 4.7 is pretty good. Now I just go to your maneuver. I did not give myself much time to work with here. You can really be under 10 kilometers. This method will work, but yeah. As you can see, we're only an hour and 13 minutes into the flight, so we're doing pretty well. So let's do this burn. And okay, 5.7 kilometer separation. So the next part, and my KSP switched automatically for me, but the next part is once you reach this separation, you want to zero out your relative velocity. So you do that first. So there's 3 modes when you're in a Kerbin orbit. There's surface, which tells you your velocity relative to the surface of Kerbin. Orbit, which tells you your velocity, your orbital velocity. And then the third type is target. Now, because my target is my space station, this is the one I want to use. So, this is where things start getting pretty tricky. So first, you want to get your ship retrograde to your target. So, it's advised to use reaction wheels for this, just because that will be much easier in terms of, you can see my relative speed changing a lot here. But since I'm putting a whole fuel tank, reaction wheels won't really cut it from a lot of electricity. So that's pretty good. Got the RCS. And then now I just want to warp to here. So you can see the 2 spacecraft are getting closer and closer. Okay, and I am nearly at my intersect. Now, once you reach your intersect, so your retrograde will change a bit, so you want to adjust that. Once you reach the intersect, you want to do a big burn, just zero out this velocity relative to your target. So right now we have 5.3 kilometer separation, and this is pretty good. So now I'm just doing a retrograde burn. You can see the target is going to start getting farther and farther away. So now we're getting close, and now I just want to zero out my velocity before I proceed to the next step. So you can see target velocity going down. Now I want to get this to 0. Okay. Now the next step is you want to point towards the target, which is up here. Alright, SAS is making it go that long way around. And you're just going to get some speed going in that direction. So, for these types of distances, you want maybe that much. This really depends just on how much delta V you have to work with, because I have this absolutely massive rocket. I have a little under half a tank in this lower stage. I'm not really worried about efficiency, so I can just do it in the most timely manner possible. But if you do decide to do some really efficient rocket, then you want to be sure to just do maybe like 10 meters per second and wait it out. So yeah, let's get this lined up. Okay, so you can see my distance decreasing. Now I'm pointing retrograde to the target again. So once I get close as I possibly can to the target, I'm going to zero out all my velocity relative to the target. Again, make sure you're in target mode. And then I'm just going to repeat this process until I get within about 100 meters of the target. So you can see, I'll probably only have to do this once. So I'm getting closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. Okay, I'll start zeroing out my velocity. Okay. And let's get this down to 0. Okay. Now, I'm pretty close now, so I feel comfortable just detaching it and using this. So, it's worth mentioning, I do have a second control point on this stage, just because I think it's good form to try and deorbit these things. Obviously not a requirement for KSP, but this is something that's becoming increasingly fashionable in the rocket industry, just because of the space junk problem. So I'm going to come back at the end of this video and deorbit this stage into Kerbin using my loads of excess delta V. So now I've attached this final docking stage. Now, depending on your vehicle, this may not be a step you have to go through, but yeah. So now I'm going to use these monopropellant thrusters to orient myself towards my space station, and then just pick up a little bit of speed. Since you're, 300 meters from the actual objective, really, monopropellant thrusters will be more than enough. If you decide to use liquid fuel thrusters, you might overshoot it, and yeah, so I would recommend just doing this method. So again, I'll come back for this stage later on and deorbit it. Stars look really beautiful with this mod. Really spectacular. So at about 3 meters per second. So now this is where I really want to use what I set up earlier. So let's turn on the lights. This helps. And this is where I really want to use my this right here. So let me zero out my velocity once I get close, and I will show you guys. Perfect, the sun is coming out. It's one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning. It's best if you do this when there's sunlight out, and that's super hard to predict when you're doing stuff in low Kerbin orbit like I am, and it goes around Kerbin like once every, I think, half an hour it feels like. So, but yeah. It's much easier when the sun is out because you can kind of see things a lot more clearly than just using these lights. So zooming out gives you a good kind of sense of the spaces we're talking about here. Okay, so let's just decrease my velocity a bit. Now comes the really tough part. So first I want to face the anti-normal direction. So if you remember, I put this one right here, which I'm going to set as a target, this docking port in the normal direction. And you'll see now why this helps. Now I can just lock my vehicle in the anti-normal direction, and it's not a problem. So there's a docking mode in KSP, but I think that that's not as intuitive. So instead, he used the I, J, K, and L keys. So right now, I'm pressing the K key. It's pushing this vehicle forward. If I press the L key, it's going to push it to the right. If I press the I key is going to push it backwards away from my target, and if I press the H and N keys, that will push this forwards and backwards. That was what I was using to manipulate it earlier, by the way, just those H and N keys. So yeah, now it's important to remember you want to control from your docking port. This will give you the best precision when you're doing your RCS maneuvers. So, you really just want to, I find the easiest way to do this is just to lock in each axis as precisely as possible before you do your approach. So, obviously this will be a last axis. I'm going to give myself some margin. Now I go here and just do this burn right here. And so I've zeroed out my velocity more or less in that direction. Now I just want to zero it out in this direction. So I'm using the I and K keys here. Now this may change depending on your docking port orientation. So I would just mess around a little bit on your own and see which ways the thrusters are firing, which way you're moving. So that's the most organic way just to figure it out. So now I've more or less zeroed out this axis. So now I want to move towards the port. And use the J key to once again zero out my velocity in that direction. And as you can see, I'm doing pretty well here. Okay, so this is the easiest way to look at it. Now I just want to zero this out. This is more line of sight now. You only really need the nav ball at this point just to make sure your angle is pretty precise. Okay, so the final step is just to get this right here. And you can kind of see, because I have this clear little circle in the center of my fuel tank, that you want that little target green rectangle to be exactly in the middle. Okay. Now I'm doing pretty well. Okay. So now they're almost exactly aligned. And then final step. Thrust that way, thrust that way. Alright, now just tap on the H and N keys. So, if you've ever seen a Kraken drive, you'll know that these docking clamps do have some magnetic force. So once I get pretty close, the magnetic force will take over and just lock me in place. So I'm going. Okay, seems like I'm a little off. This is going to happen often. Just make sure you zero out your velocity. Thrust in the opposite direction. Thrust in the other direction. And back in the other direction. And you can see I'm docked. So I didn't give you a great view there, but essentially what I was doing is I just kept manipulating that until they were aligned. And then the magnetic force of my two docking clamps got them to stick to each other. So I'm sorry if this was a pretty long tutorial, but this was the way that worked best for me. I've been very hopeless at docking ships until I learned about this method, and I wanted to do a bit more of an in-depth video on exactly what steps you need to take to get something from Kerbol up to your space station. Now the last thing I'm going to do, just because I think I'm a good space citizen, is take my transfer stage up here and deorbit it and see if I can do a bit of a Falcon 9 style suicide burn landing, even though it's at orbital speed instead of suborbital speeds, which is what SpaceX does. So let me do a retrograde burn here. We can take off the thrust limiter. Just doing a retrograde burn, getting my apiapsis down. Let's try and get it over the body of land with my suicide burn. Again, I have tons of delta V to work with here. Now, this is obviously not a required step. This is just something I do because I like to try and do stuff mostly realistically. Obviously, if I wanted to do this fuel depot, I could just use the Saturn V rocket parts and build a gigantic flying behemoth that would cost like $100 billion in real life, but that's no fun because it's not even something remotely possible. So I think this is much better. But regardless, if you build $100 billion behemoths or slightly more manageable rockets, you'll still have to dock them. So let me just get the atmosphere. Okay. Since I don't have any heat shields and I have a ton of extra liquid fuel left over, I'm going to do a little bit of a burn just to decrease my velocity a bit. So yeah, the major steps to docking is first you want to get into the same plane of orbit. You do that using your descending and ascending nodes. Then you want to use the intersect nodes to get your intersect as close as possible. Get your intersect as close as you possibly can to the actual the thing you're docking with. And then the final step is just detaching and using your line of sight and your monopropellant thrusters and the H, N, I, J, K, and L keys. Okay, well, it looks like the suicide burn is going to happen today. Yeah, on this. Yeah, and using your I, J, K, and L keys to manipulate that and bring it in for a dock. So you just want to zero out all axes of rotation, and then you'll be good. We're doing a bit of a Starship belly flop, and yeah. The big explosion. We saw the decoupler that survived. So on that huge disappointment, as Jeremy Clarkson would say, it is time to end. Thank you for watching.